They laughed at me, at my love, at the man I chose to marry. But what they didn't know was that one day they'd be the ones left speechless. Disclaimer: this story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. That night felt normal at first, the kind of evening my parents loved to host. The table was perfectly arranged, the food carefully prepared, and every detail was meant to impress the relatives who had come over. I sat quietly, watching everyone talk about achievements, money, and status, the same topics that always seemed to matter in our house. My sister Alina was laughing loudly, sharing stories about her luxurious lifestyle, while my parents nodded proudly at everything she said. I felt like I didn't belong there. Like I was just another guest instead of their daughter. Still, I had something important to say, something I had been holding inside for weeks. When the conversation slowed down, I finally spoke. My voice was calm, but my heart was racing. I told them I was getting married. At first, my mother smiled with excitement, assuming it would be someone she could proudly introduce to others. My father leaned forward with interest, already imagining the kind of family I might be marrying into. Then came the question that changed everything. Who was he? I took a deep breath and said his name, Daniel. For a moment, nothing seemed wrong, but then I added the one detail that shattered their expectations. I told them he was a plumber. The reaction was immediate and brutal. The room went silent for just a second, and then it exploded into laughter. Alina laughed the hardest, as if I had just told the funniest joke she had ever heard. She couldn't believe I was serious. My parents didn't laugh, but their expressions were even worse. Disappointment, embarrassment, and anger filled their faces all at once. My father spoke first, his voice sharp and cold. He said they hadn't raised me to make such a decision, that marrying someone like that would ruin our family's image. My mother shook her head slowly, worried about what others would think. She kept repeating how embarrassing it would be, how people would talk about us behind our backs. Alina continued to mock me, making sarcastic comments about my future, about living in a small apartment, and struggling to survive. Each word felt like a knife, cutting deeper than the last. I tried to explain that Daniel was not what they thought. He was hardworking, honest, and kind in ways that none of them seemed to understand. He respected me, supported me, and treated me with a level of care I had never experienced before. But none of that mattered to them. They only heard the word plumber, and in their minds, that was enough to judge his entire worth. It didn't matter who he was as a person. It didn't matter how happy he made me. All that mattered to them was status. I felt something inside me begin to crack. It wasn't just anger, but a deep realization that I had been living in a world where love and character, nothing compared to appearances. I looked around the table, at the people I had called family, and suddenly they felt like strangers. Their laughter, their judgment, their lack of understanding. It all became too much. For the first time, I saw them clearly, without the illusion I had grown up believing in. When I said I loved him, my voice trembled, but I meant every word. My father dismissed it instantly, saying love wasn't enough to build a life. He talked about money, reputation, and security, as if those were the only things that mattered. My mother agreed. Her concern focused entirely on how this would affect our social standing. Alina didn't even try to hide her amusement, enjoying every second of my humiliation. That was the moment everything changed. I realized I had a choice to make. I could stay quiet, give in to their expectations, and live a life they approved of. Or I could stand by my decision and accept whatever consequences came with it. The fear was there, but it was no longer stronger than my determination. I straightened my posture, looked at each of them, and spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. I told them they didn't have to come to the wedding. They thought I was joking at first. My mother tried to brush it off, assuming I would come to my senses. My father looked at me as if I had just said something impossible, but I didn't take it back. I repeated it, making it clear that I meant every word. If they couldn't respect my choice, they didn't need to be part of it. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. But this time, it was different. The laughter was gone, replaced by shock and disbelief. The days that followed were tense and quiet. No one tried to change my mind, but no one supported me either. It was as if I had already been pushed out of the family, even before the wedding happened. But for the first time in my life, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't trying to please anyone anymore. I wasn't living according to their expectations. I was choosing my own path, even if it meant walking it alone. The wedding itself was nothing like the grand events my parents loved. It was small, simple, and filled with people who genuinely cared about us. There were no expensive decorations or impressive displays. Just honest smiles and warm hearts. Daniel stood beside me, holding my hand with quiet strength. When he looked at me, there was no judgment, no expectation, just pure love and trust. In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. He leaned closer and told me that one day, my family would regret the way they treated us. I smiled, not because I was thinking about revenge, but because I no longer needed their approval to feel complete. I believed him. But it didn't matter as much as it once would have. I had found something more valuable than their acceptance, something real and unshakable. 2 years passed without a single word from them. No calls, no messages, no attempts to reconnect, as if I had disappeared from their lives completely. And in that silence, I built a new life with Daniel, one that was not defined by status or appearances but by hard work, respect, and genuine happiness, until one day a gold envelope arrived at my door, carrying an invitation that would bring everything back to the surface and set the stage for a moment none of them were prepared for. The invitation arrived in a gold envelope, elegant and heavy, the kind my parents always admired. I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it, already knowing what it would be. Inside was an invitation to Alina's wedding, printed in beautiful lettering, announcing her marriage to a wealthy businessman. Everything about it reflected the life she had always dreamed of, the life my parents had always praised. At the bottom of the card, there was a handwritten note from her, short and sharp, almost like a challenge. She wanted me to come, to see for myself how far she had risen, and maybe to remind me of what I had lost. I smiled when I read it, not out of bitterness, but because I knew something she didn't. The day of the wedding arrived, and the venue was exactly what I expected. It was grand, luxurious, and filled with people dressed in expensive clothes, all carefully chosen to impress one another. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft light across the hall, and the sound of polite laughter filled the air. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered, more than anything else, where people measured each other's worth based on wealth and status. As I walked in with Daniel, I could feel the attention shift toward us. Conversations slowed, and eyes turned in our direction, trying to figure out whether we belonged there. I could see the confusion on their faces, because we didn't look out of place at all. Daniel stood beside me, confident and composed, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that reflected not just style, but quiet success. I wore a simple but elegant dress, nothing flashy. but enough to show that I was comfortable in my own skin. We didn't need to prove anything to anyone, and that confidence spoke louder than any display of wealth. My parents were among the first to notice us. My mother's expression changed instantly, her eyes widening in surprise, as she looked me up and down, trying to reconcile the image in front of her with the one she had created in her mind. She approached me slowly, her voice uncertain, as if she didn't know how to begin. She commented on how I looked, almost as if she expected me to appear broken or regretful. I simply smiled and answered calmly, letting her see that I was neither. There was no anger in me, no need to prove her wrong with words. My presence alone was enough to create doubt in everything she had believed. Before she could say more, Alina appeared, her confidence still intact, but her eyes sharp with curiosity. She greeted me with a tight smile, masking her true thoughts behind polite words. Her tone quickly shifted, though, as she made a remark about Daniel, still holding on to the same assumption she had always had. She joked about how far a plumber's income could really go, implying that whatever we had was temporary or superficial. Daniel didn't react the way she expected. He didn't get defensive or try to argue. Instead, he remained calm, almost amused, as if he had heard it all before. I responded just as calmly, telling her that she would understand soon. That single sentence lingered in the air, subtle but powerful, planting a seed of uncertainty in her mind. The ceremony continued as planned, filled with perfect smiles and carefully rehearsed emotions. Everything looked flawless on the surface, but underneath, there was tension building, a quiet shift that no one could fully explain yet. Guests admired the decorations, praised the couple, and enjoyed the luxury surrounding them, unaware that the real moment of the evening had not yet arrived. When the reception began, the atmosphere became more relaxed. But the sense of anticipation remained, as if something unexpected was about to happen. Then the host stepped onto the stage, calling for everyone's attention. His voice was clear and confident as he announced that there was a special guest, someone who had played a major role in making the entire event possible. The room filled with curiosity, as people began to wonder who this important figure could be. Names were whispered, guesses were made, but no one expected what came next. When the host spoke Daniel's name, the reaction was immediate and undeniable. The same people who had barely noticed him before now looked at him with shock and disbelief. Daniel walked toward the stage with steady confidence, unaffected by the sudden change in attention. He took the microphone and looked out at the crowd, his expression calm but firm. He didn't rush his words or try to impress anyone with unnecessary details. Instead, he spoke simply and honestly, explaining that, while he had started his journey as a plumber, he had worked hard to build something much bigger. He talked about the company he had created, about the projects he had managed, and about the growth that had come from years of dedication and persistence. As he spoke, the screen behind him came to life, displaying images and information that left no room for doubt. Large infrastructure projects, successful business deals, and achievements that spoke louder than any title ever could. The same profession that had been mocked was now revealed as the foundation of something extraordinary. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that comes when people are forced to confront their own assumptions. I looked toward my parents and saw the realization on their faces. My father, who had once spoken with such certainty, now avoided eye contact, unable to face the truth in front of him. My mother looked overwhelmed, her earlier confidence replaced by regret and confusion. Alina stood frozen, her perfect image cracking under the weight of what she was witnessing. The laughter, the judgment, the arrogance. All of it had disappeared, replaced by something they were not used to feeling. When Daniel finished speaking, he returned to my side as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To him, this was not about proving anyone wrong. It was simply the truth, finally revealed. He asked quietly why I had never told them, and I answered honestly that they had never cared enough to ask. That was the difference between us and them. We had built our lives on understanding and respect, while they had built theirs on assumptions and appearances. As we prepared to leave, my mother rushed toward us, her voice filled with urgency and regret. She tried to explain, to justify their behavior, saying they didn't know the full story. But her words came too late. The problem was never a lack of information, but a lack of willingness to see beyond their own beliefs. My father admitted they had made a mistake, his tone heavy with realization. But even that acknowledgement could not undo what had already been done. I listened to them without anger, because I no longer needed their approval or validation. What I had built with Daniel was stronger than anything they could take away or give back. I responded calmly, letting them understand that some lessons are only learned through experience, through facing the consequences of one's own actions. There was no need for revenge anymore, because the truth itself had already done everything that needed to be done. We walked away together, leaving behind a room full of people who would never see things the same way again. Sometimes, the people who doubt you the most are the ones who teach you the biggest lessons. This wasn't just a story about revenge. It was about self-worth, respect, and proving that success isn't defined by titles, but by determination. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because you never know who needs to hear this today.